Hello again, and as the title of this video implies, I think everyone should write code. And I mean everyone, like age of 5, 6 to 95, 96. There is absolutely no limit, I think. And I'd like to make the case for why everyone should write code and not just computer scientists or professional programmers or, people who are kind of, doing this on the side. If we look back at the history of communication, there are some critical paradigm shifts. The alphabet, the printing press, radio, television. Now, all of these bring their own flavor to the way that our society is structured and how we spend our time, but they also have a common thread in that agency usually is kind of concentrated. For example, the alphabet, not everyone could read, so those who could read would tell others the written word. Printing press, not everyone can have their books published, so again, there's a bit of a selection. Radio, television, somewhat similar story. And this level of agency is important because I'm not going to say it's always negative. Obviously, it's not always about propaganda or, about domination, but even if it's used for good, it kind of robs us from our own agency. So with the coming of the internet, even without coding, there's a huge shift because now almost everyone can create content, which is good. I mean, for the most part, there's a lot of, filler and terrible stuff out there, but again, it's a tool for expression, it's a tool for sharing. Now, this alone is quite valuable because any content that I create and I send through the internet has the same value as a tweet that is published by the president of the USA. It doesn't matter. It's just the same for the internet. It just travels. Now, when you add code, now that's a huge paradigm shift. And I think this has not been truly explored. I think it's undervalued. People think that coding is just like another skill, like, repairing a car or maybe CPR, which are, again, quite beneficial. But with coding, suddenly this primary communication capability that we have takes on another level because we can now influence the bias. Now, what do I mean by the bias of a technology? In very simple terms, almost every technology has its own tendencies that it imposes on the people who use the technology. A very simple example, search engines. Search engines want you to click a lot of links. So it's not about you finding or being satisfied with what you discover. It's more about you searching, basically. So it's a lot of clicking. Things like television, for example, there are a lot of great studies on this. I think Neil Postman had a great book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. So he was discussing about the nature of television, and it's actually got a bias towards constant movement, like one thing after another. So moving forward with that, social media is kind of shaped like television, which is very interesting because it could have been very different, but instead it's like, you scroll through content that other people create. It's like who's on vacation and, there's a recipe or something, but it just keeps scrolling. Like television, it just keeps moving, but it didn't have to be that way. It could have been very different. It could have been more about memory, more about location, more about, building on top of certain things instead of just constantly moving on to the next thing. So another example, which is more personal, is that roughly 8 or 9 years ago, we completed a research project, which was about mobile games for children, but we wanted to first understand what impact it has on the social interaction of children. Eye contact, verbal communication, physical communication, the body language and everything. And we wanted to see if we could create a technology which had a bias towards communication, face-to-face communication, which feels weird because a lot of us don't want children to be immersed in those screens. It's like, screen time, limit that. But the way we worked it out was we created a game for cooking. It was very visceral, like it's, you've moved your fingers and it sliced the, tomatoes and other ingredients. And then you could kind of tilt the tablet and they would roll into the next tablet, which had like a bowl or a pot. So we had a single player version of this, which, kids played in a typical way. And we tested this on like 64 kids. So they just didn't really talk. It was like only 13% of the time they were in that room did they communicate, and it was usually simple stuff, simple questions. And then we flipped it around so that they had to collaborate. So there was a recipe on one page, one person chopped the onions, the other stirred them, and suddenly it just flipped. It became 80% communication, including body language. Like some kids tried to dominate others. There was like a bit of contention, and there were a lot of, coordination and laughter, and even a fight broke out, which is great. I mean, it's part of, playing as a kid. So suddenly that game, that device had a different bias. It had a tilt towards socialization. So that's why if you write code and you combine that with the power of the internet, you can start creating technologies for yourself and others which have tendencies that you want to see in the world. So this could be something like increasing the complexity. Like there's a lot of polarization where things are becoming overly simplified. People are getting caught in their echo chambers. It doesn't have to be that way. You could create technologies that promote complex thinking, like having multiple viewpoints in your mind. You can create technologies that slow things down. You can create technologies that push you to explore. So on and on. It's kind of up to you. Again, I could give a reference to two writers who are very well versed in this. One would be Douglas Rushkoff. His book Program or Be Programmed has a similar theme. And then there's Jonathan Zittrain. So you can check out their content as well. But this video, I wanted this to be like an introduction to why I think coding is important. And on the next video, I'll move on to how I'm kind of practicing what I preach, in that I'm creating code that is promoting the way I want to learn music.